Rahmetullah ve berekatuhu. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillah Rabbil alemin. Ve salatu ve selamu ala seyyidina Muhammedin ve ala alihi ve sahbihi ecma'in. Welcome to our today's meeting of the webinar series of Nursi studies on topic of self, senses, science, and certainty. Husserl's pure phenomenology versus Nursi's Manay Harfi approach by our colleague Professor Dr. Necati Aydın. And as you know Necati, but as this is recorded, I want to introduce him very briefly. I hope he doesn't mind. And Necati Aydın is a professor of economics at Al Faisal University, Saudi Arabia. He has 2 doctoral degrees, one in education and the other in economics. He has taught at different universities in the US, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. And he's, of course, as you know, he's a founding board member and executive director of Nursi Society. He presents his works through conferences and seminars at top universities around the world, including Harvard and Cambridge and also Üsküdar University. And he published many books and articles, but most important one for our topic today is Said Nursi and Science in Islam. Character building through Nursi's Manay Harfi by Routledge Press, as you know. This book, as far as I understand, it's my feeling, it is one of the original books on Manay Harfi and how we present it to the academia. And Necati has developed and conducted several effective teaching workshops at different universities. I think the most important one is 5D Thinking online certificate program with Üsküdar University. We will have the 3rd one in this summer, inshallah. The program aims to teach a unique method to derive certain character lessons from scientific knowledge. So I cordially invite Necati to present his presentation to us. And I will give him 45 minutes for presentation and another 45 minutes for questions and answers and comments. Yes, Necati, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, İbrahim Hocam. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good morning to those who are joining us from the very west, and good afternoon those who are joining from the east. So inshallah, it's a great pleasure to present such topics to you, share with you. I think in one way, my job is going to be easy in a sense that in one way it's difficult. It's difficult in the sense that if I pretend as if I'm an expert in the subject, that would be very difficult because we have a really good expert among us that's going to listen. But I actually consider myself, as Ibrahim Hocam mentioned, so my expertise is in education and economics. So I'm a student in philosophy and phenomenology. Therefore, I kind of consider this a seminar, a graduate seminar presentation to those distinguished professors, and I'm seeking their, inshallah, help and input to further enhance my understanding of topic. I sincerely believe in that, what I mentioned just. The topic, though, having said that, the topics I think that it's one of the topics perhaps I have been working on longest compared to others. Normally, when I prepare presentation, it takes a relatively short time to do that, but this one I think that it is in work in progress for at least 3 years. In last 3 years, my
Necati, there is a muffling with the voice. Hakan, can you check it? What is the reason? Because it is also recorded.
Is it maybe someone's mic is on? If that's the case, it's possible. Or
please, I am turning I am muting myself. Please, after up to Necati finish his presentation, mute yourself.
Okay. So is it okay now? Is there any background voice, Ibrahim Hocam, since you turned it off? Oh, it's okay.
Ibrahim Hocam, all mics
yes.
are muted, but the problem I think is with the microphone. Necati Hocam, could you make a test in your computer if possible?
I see. Actually,
as Colin Hoca says, it is not it is no background issue, but voice is muffled.
Okay, let me change it.
Can you use, you like me, your headphone?
I think I could try that. 1 second. Let me do that. It is possible.
I will give you more 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so can you hear me now?
Good.
Better?
Keep going.
It is much
Excellent.
better.
Yeah.
Okay, good, excellent. Okay, so as I mentioned, that this is a topic I have been working on for quite a long time, and despite that, I still feel that I need to really study more, and I'm keep reading. In the last 3 years, I think most of my reading is either direct or indirectly related to phenomenology, to the level that my little Ibrahim here, his favorite word now is not epistemology, it's phenomenology, because that's, he perhaps see that I'm occupied with this concept too much. So he used to recite epistemology, now he's talking about phenomenology. Okay, here is the outline of my presentation. I'm going to first discuss the problem, then solution, then the methods, then the outcomes. And depending on the time I will have it, then I will discuss, I compare Husserl's with Nursi on the topic above. But let me first tell you that really what excites me about this topic, and to me, is the exciting part is that phenomenology it has a potential to give us a viable alternative methodology in seeking knowledge, in understanding the truth beyond the factual truth, in actually in talking about metaphysical issue with quite, I will say, unequivocal evidence. That I think that's really the part that is exciting me, because what we know that I'm going to mention is basically with dominant scientific methodology, it seems like when we talk about metaphysical issue, that's out of science, and when we talk, we have to again be observation based, be empirical, data based, and that's therefore it's what we have, it's considered just subjective, and it's true for us, but it's not communicable to the general. That's the issue. So let's start with the problem. Then what's really the problem in eyes of Husserl's and somehow Nursi. I will refer to Nursi from time to time, but not too much, assuming that you all are really a good expert of Nursi, that you can easily remember what I'm referring to in the presentation. The problem, I put it, that the problem is being skeptic of senses, scientific knowledge, and the loss of meaning, which particularly, I will say, with modern science. That is the problem, and that is the elephant in the room. And as we know, this for a very famous phrase, but it's elephant in this case is in the dark room, and the elephant is basically, it's all this let's say knowledge or truth or creation out there that we try to know about it. Question, how can we know and how can we be sure about what we know? That is the question. So in this regard, it's which one shall I trust, or shall we trust? Shall we trust the sensual data, the visual data, the audio data, or should we trust the mind, logic? Or what I'm going to mention, particularly today, phenomenology will say that you should actually trust the self first and foremost, in order to even trust others. So that's, I think, in this regard, that's what I see the phenomenology is leading us and helping us to go to different direction. So
the question is a famous question of when you think and try to reach certainty, and can you be sure about anything? And it's famous, Descartes, and deep skepticism of questioning. And when we look at the Husserls, we really find the same things. Really, it's a very interesting case because he got his PhD in mathematics, but he did not even trust the mathematical knowledge as like a universal, absolute, verified certain knowledge. And he had a serious problem. So the problem that he had was, how can we be sure about any knowledge, and even that's, let's say, mathematical knowledge or scientific knowledge? And the doubt is everywhere. And I think somehow when you study Husserl, you find out that he eventually somehow rely on this Descartes' concept of the self, the I, the thinking self, the doubting self, and the doubting about everything but itself. So, and that's, it seems like it's somehow it is the starting point and the main subject of phenomenological approach as well. Now, the issue here that when you try to really, learn about anything, that you get, let's say, you have your perception of an object out there, and this, the mind, builds its idea about the object, that's representational idea of the perception. And the key is that whether you can ever penetrate into the objects and know really what is out there, or you only know what your senses tell you. That's questions, and I think it's a very valid question. It seems like bother many individuals, but an answer that we get it from, let's say, someone like Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant will say that we can only have access to phenomena. You cannot have access to noumena. And so it's only what appears to you that you can study that, but you can't really go beside that. Yeah, you might have a priori knowledge, and in this case, but you can't really have a direct access to that. It seems like it's Hakan, I think there is a mic on as well. So it seems like Husserl's, it's very much different when it comes to the issue. He thinks that knowledge, our knowledge of reality, is not representational. It's our perception is not taking the picture of what is out there and try to, again, induce or deduct certain things based on what we derive from there. He thinks that is actually on the universe, the things and the events and everything, it is revealing itself. And in this case, it's presenting itself to us. So our knowledge is relational. I think to me is one of the key things, that to see whether knowledge is representational or relational. By the way, that I'm going to go through many technical concepts. So we're going to have discussion. So we can obviously have any objection or some suggestion should be on discussion part. But if the concept part you feel is not clear and you want to really just ask for clarification, I think we can do that and get in like a brief interruption and say, oh, what do you mean by this concept? That's only for clarification. The discussion should be toward the end. So again, in Husserlian understanding, that's one of the essential parts in terms of really our epistemological approach. Our understanding is that knowledge is not representational, it is relational. It's a relation between conscious and the object of the conscious. That's really how he will define it. So then the conscious is, in this case, is the transcendental, is some things comes with transcendental ego. It's part of transcendental ego. So in this case, knowledge is always knowledge of the ego in relation to the object of, let's say, of whatever you intend to learn, and therefore he will put in intentionality as the essential concept. This is understanding as well. So as I mentioned, so the key part here is how can we be sure about whatever we know? And is there any things that can give us certainty? So this doubting mind that we know very well from Descartes, and then leading to the self eventually, and doubting about everything other than doubting self, and somehow having the duality that you have the mind, and the mind reflect on the matter, and then now the mind and go and try to discover and understand the other. Husserl somehow thinks that that duality shall not be there. He thinks that there is unity out there. You can't really separate the mind from matter, consciousness from its objects of intentionality. So therefore, so you can't really have any objective knowledge without involvement of the subjective self in gaining knowledge. So, and in this regard, Husserl also is very much against this duality of Kantian idea that we have phenomena, noumena, and phenomena is what we can access, and noumena is beyond our reach. And in this case, it's actually, Husserl thinks that's a fundamental mistake, that it is within our reach to understand noumena as well. And obviously, we need to see how he defined noumena, because he's gonna, call it the essence, and he seems like he's all after the essence of what really appears to us. So Husserl, he began, of course, with phenomenology when as I mentioned, he began with mathematics. Then he moved to psychology. What he find out is psychology. He find out that basically in psychology that what they are doing, they're just naturalizing human science, and they're just getting this, naturalism, empiricism from, from science or physical science, and applying this to human science. And, when you look at that, and obviously I think I can confess it, that there's a Newtonian, an approach of really studying the causal relationships through empirical evidence. That's an analytical way of really looking at the data and observation and building your theory and hypothesis based on that one, or testing your hypothesis based on this. It is really, it's dominating in every area, and in economics particularly, we almost don't recognize any other options. That's the main way to go. If you want to do science, that's the way to go. So, but Husserl, coming from this tradition, was well aware of the shortcoming of this methodology. And when he went to psychology and realized that they're really stuck with this, methodology which goes nowhere, and that he was trying to really looking for some alternative, because and then he wrote a book, and the book is it wasn't finished, I think, but it was published after his death. And the book, it is a very, I think it's his last work is somehow, it can, I think, give you the essence of all his life's struggle to come up with alternative methods that he calls phenomenology. So, but the title of the book called The Crisis of European Sciences. What he means in that one is basically, in the book, he's discussing the crisis not only in physical science, he discussed the crisis in human science, social science as well. And he's saying that, look, he's not against experimental observational data. He's not saying there's not useful. He's saying, look, the method that we're using is actually extremely useful in terms of giving an instrument and helping us to develop the tools, technology. But it is absolutely useless because it doesn't give us anything in terms of meaning, and we are lost, and we can't really claim anything through this knowledge, that everything becomes relative, and and it becomes almost impossible to have any meaning. So that is his problem, and he thinks that problem is not only is our problem of studying the universe, or the nature, is our problem of knowing ourselves as well, and establishing establishing a meaningful life as well. Therefore, he thinks that is really the ultimate cause of the problem that we experience of nihilisms and meaning, and this, psychological, social problem. He thinks it goes back to the approach that we use and scientific approach that we use in seeking knowledge. So therefore, he felt compelled to really attract our attention to the problem, and and though his life wasn't sufficient to finish that, and after he dies, they both collect those his writing and publishes a book. He says that when it comes to meaning and modern science, he writes that science excludes precisely the question which man, given over our unhappy times to the most portentous appeals, finds the most burning, the question of the meaning or meaninglessness of the whole of this human existence. He's saying that, this is the most important question, but science has absolutely, nothing to say about it, exclude this question. And therefore he thinks that for all its machines, medicine, and explanatory power, science has nothing to say to our most important human question, that question regarding, concerning the meaning of human existence. And essentially, he's calling on phenomenology to answer this question and to be at least a way to help us to get the answer. So in this regard, he's very clear. It's very clear when you read his writing that he is against this naturalism to be taken as a base and as the only way to our knowledge, and every other way is just subjective and not reliable. But meanwhile, he is not in favor of psychologism as well. He's not talking about, what I know personally, this is my view, this is your view. He's not talking about the personal subjective views. He is talking the first person perspective on the essence of the experience. That he thinks that, what the concept he uses, I will mention later on, the intersubjectivity, that he will say that when I compare my subjective perspective with yours, we can find some universal element that can help us to build up some objective knowledge that I call this, subjective and objective knowledge, and I will mention later on. So in this case, he thinks basically, that we need to move from naturalism and move from psychologism. But he is not. Is one thing I want to mention from the beginning. He is really not someone after absolute truth or metaphysical truth, and it's very ironic actually. I don't know why his methodology is very much, I think, useful for any metaphysical claim, but he is not really discussing this topic almost at all. But I will still say that you can put him, in among the less Hegelian tradition, in which that he seems like he believes in eternity of the soul or spirit, and he will refer that he says he will refer this knowledge is the experience of the spirit and the science of the spirit to a certain extent. So you see there's some references there, but it's not explicit. Like when I read it, somehow I for some reason I remember Yunus Hocam says, look, it seems like he's scared to really use some phrases because he thinks he might be criticized by this community out there. So that's just joking, Hocam, for you. When we just briefly, if you really look at just in this section, look at Nursi and Husserl's, I see there are some commonality in terms of their understanding of the problem of knowledge. And it seems like both searching for certainty in their knowledge, both engage in lifelong fight with naturalism. And when Nursi will say that, I fight with two taghut, one is tabiat, nature. I think that's, you can see that he sees this as enemy. But Nursi goes beyond physical knowledge, seeking metaphysical truth. That's, I think, is the key differences. And so we can see in Nursi, as particularly in the Mesnevi, you can see that Nursi is genuinely engaged in, internal debate and doubt and actually referring them as a battles. In each word that La ilaha illallah, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, he says, in every one of them, like there were real battles of, it seems like doubt and questions, and then he tried to really see how he can reach the certainty. Then, in this case, so Nursi was not really satisfied with subjective evidence through tasawwuf either, because, for him that, let's say, therefore he wouldn't mention, let's say, karama as a way to really, make his case, because he's after something that is, again, universal, that can be communicated to others. And in this case, when you read Nursi, you see Nursi will say, don't settle on anything less than verified truths that based on the evidence. That's what I think that is in this regard. I see the commonality between the two. But and Nursi will warn us and say, be careful. Whatever you're told, just don't take it to your heart. And because some people knowingly, some unknowingly might corrupt you. So it's your job to actually assess them, judge them critically, and then to see whether has, again, it's worth to get to your heart, which worth means that it has evidence that it's really a true claim, a truth claim. Now, the second part, this is the problem part. The second part, I'm going to talk about the solution. What is the solution? If there's a problem with against our certainty and seeking the knowledge, particularly in the science, and if the scientific approach is affecting everyone, so what is the solution? The solution, if I can put it in 3 words, that I see that from Husserl is a self and consciousness and experience, against understanding the experience of the self and the nature of experience that somehow will get us to the solution. Now, I will mention and how he will formulate this as a methodology and put it again, phenomenological method, and I will mention later on. But here I'm going to mainly focus on the key phrase that is going to be the pillar of his methodology. So, in this regard, essentially, he's offering phenomenology, and so he thinks that phenomenology is basically you studying the essence of things, and you go back to the things themselves, and you try to see what is given to you in your experience without concealing themselves. You try to directly get exposed, being exposed to this disclosure. And then you try to use the transcendental ego to drive some meaning or make some meaning of what you are experiencing, essentially. So that's, again, you're going to define it as, put it in a particular way to truly do the phenomenology. But there's some key concept in his phenomenological approach. And one of the, of course, the most important one is ego. And ego here, we call it transcendental ego. Again, the transcendental here is, but first of all, Husserl thinks that ego is real, does exist. So, so ego does exist. Hakan Hocam, I see Yunus Hocam is entering the waiting room. I don't know why, or maybe, okay, he has internet connection problem, perhaps. Okay, so he thinks that the ego does exist and is real. And what is the evidence for that one? He's saying that, the evidence I exist for myself and constantly given to myself, my experiential evidence as I myself. So it's basically direct intuition. So in other words, saying, look, I don't need to provide you any evidence that whether you have the self, the ego. So I know from my own self, I have the self. So I am talking right now, I know it's me. And it will say that you have the constant evidence to yourself as well. Finish, that's enough. You don't need, he will call it intuition. This intuitional evidence, it does not require any other evidence like empirical, whatever. He thinks it's nonsense to even look at the other because you have direct access to it. That's all. And from your own intuition, finishes, period. That's what he thinks. And he, in this regard, differs from Kant, and because it doesn't, in Kantian concept that basically ego is not real, but is necessary to really have the sense of unity in your experience. But he thinks that's not the case. He thinks ego is real, and we all know intuitively. And we have to really start from that. That's very, very important. What does transcendent part of the ego? Transcendent part of the ego, I think, is, I would say, mostly it's for human being, that in which that you're not only aware of, let's say, the objects that you are basically experiencing. You are aware of yourself as well, in a way that you can go out of your body and actually, now let's say I can look at myself that I'm making presentation. So that this let's say, having somehow a third eye looking above me and actually watching me and watching me making presentation, you think that is actually somehow, that's the transcendental ego, can go beyond the body, can go beyond, what you experience now, and can somehow look and try to make sense of what is happening. That is, again, transcend the body and transcend the self, and basically look from the above, in a sense. For Husserl, the world cannot be thought of except as being constituted by the transcendental ego's intentional act. That's very, very big claim. So in other words, he's saying that, your world is nothing but is the world that made up by your transcendental ego's intentional act. So in other words, it's actually, you see what you intend to see, you see what you direct your attention to it, and whatever you means that your ego, that basically relate and get into its awareness, and that makes your world. And so in this case, he defined consciousness as a relationship. So consciousness is a relationship between the ego and the objects in general. In this case, the objects of, let's say, intentional acts. What do you want to really know? That's I think, how he defined it. Now, so that's very important to really to know this. It's all about consciousness. It's all about how the ego become conscious of itself and others, and to study the nature of this experience. Now, when doing that, he's saying, to do this, first of all, you need to give up your unreflective mode. So unreflective mode, he called it natural attitude. I think that's in Nursi, is like when you, again, the concept of ulfa will be something like this, when you really see something and get used to it and take it for granted. He will say this is a default mode, and you need to first give up this mode. And in this case, his argument is that have a transcendental turn from the naively living human ego, who takes the existence of the world for granted, to the ego that experiences the world. As such, the transcendental ego is the agent that constitutes, builds up the world in its intentional acts. So that's basically, that's what he thinks, that if you really want to understand anything, you have to first, move into the reflective mode. Otherwise, if you just get lost within your everyday life, it says, sorry, there's nothing for you. Just like, and in this case, robots just, you're walking around and doing something. You say, no, you need to just sit back and try to really reflect on what is going on. In this case, this reflective act of the ego is the essential part in this regard. So he will say that when you do that, you will realize that as the world is actually, it is given to you. So there are everywhere, everything that's, this data is an event, and, many things coming to you now, this givenness of the world. He says that your job in this regard as an ego is try to really, see how you're making sense of all these things around you, and try to have access them from the view from the within. Which means try to see how you're experiencing the world that is exposed to you or given to you. So in this regard, he defines phenomenology as a rigorous science of subjective in analyzing the different attitude the subject takes toward the world when the world is given. Whether that world is given in terms of, let's say, an experiment or observation or personal, let's say, imagination, it doesn't really matter. Or the phrase he uses, he says that basically you need to focus on the lived experience. So lived experience means that you need to really become conscious of your own experience. So he gave an example, and actually I applied this, the driving things. Now, let's say when you learn how to drive a car, and when you're just driving for the first time, you're fully conscious of almost every act in driving. But as as the time passes and you start to become expert, you really forget, you fully forget about, all this act even you do when you're driving car. It just become your second nature. You don't really know what's going on. You're just automatically driving that. Husserl thinks that we need to get to be like the novice driver, as if we need to, if we want to make sense of anything, we need to act as if we are just born and come to this earth and this planet, and then we need to put everything aside. We're gonna mention all the theory, hypothesis, concepts, put them all this aside, that you will call it bracketing, and then focus on really what is in front of us, that is directly exposed to us. So he thinks this is absolutely essential, that unless you get into the lived experience, you can't really know what's going on. And because you have been given, all this theory, concept, culture, or belief, whatever, that is going to prevent you to have direct access to that. So in this regard, so basically, he thinks that that the world as the totality of what consciousness experiences is built up from the intentional acts. And in this regard, that intentionality is one of the key concepts in Husserl's. And consciousness, when in terms of awareness of myself and awareness of the world, always work in intentional way. So basically, he's saying that that you are always, when you have a conscious, you're always conscious of something. So in this case, he wants us to really understand the intentionality. To understand the consciousness, he'll say that basically there are two dimensions of intentionality, and non-narrow and gnosis. And he says that intentionality is the directedness of consciousness towards its object of experience. So in a sense that he thinks your consciousness never work without having some things as an object of experience for it. So in a sense, you are always conscious of some things. So that's why he thinks that is important. He talks about two elements of the intentionality. One is nomia is the object of experience, gnosis is the act of experience. So in this case, he thinks it's really important that we separate the object of experience. When you look at a tree, let's say, you want to have an experience of tree, understand what tree is. He thinks tree now for you is an object of experience. Now, in this case, he says the act of experience is what you perceive, what you feel, what you think, what you judge, what you have. That is the act of experience. He thinks that the act of experience is the part that's actually giving the meaning to the object of experience. So in a sense that basically he thinks that the meaning is directly given by the self, and in this case the self give the meaning to the object of experience based on based on he has another words that I call it like a worldview that you have it given to you. Now, again, intentionality is really an essential part that in Husserl's, that it's very important that we understand how intentionality works and how consciousness works through intentionality. Now, Husserl's, when he talks about reflection, he's saying that reflection is not just observation of fact, but the reflection is actually it is an attempt of making the sense of what you are reflecting on. So in a sense, he thinks that when you're reflecting, you're not just passively observing something and recording something. He thinks that when you're reflecting, you are involving in making sense of the object of the reflection, and therefore you're going to drive certain meaning. So in this regard, if we have to summarize this part, is that basically is to know, is to experience is to direct consciousness to the object of experience of learning, and to understand what you are experiencing is to relate this object to the self, because it's relational, and to relate it is to give a meaning. And to give a meaning to, based on what? Based on the self. So the self is, in this case, is the one, the source that's really assigned the meaning. And so, and how do you get this meaning? So gave this meaning based on, again, the life world that he has another in the word that he used, that I call it like a worldview, that you have it basically, give you the meaning of what the self is now experiencing. So in this case, learning is becoming, as you learn more, you enrich your perspective to view differently. Now that is, again, that is basically the solution that, if we summarize, that he thinks is the solution lies in the consciousness, the transcendental ego, and understanding the experience. Now we're going to talk about how he turned this into methodology, the pure phenomenology. In this regard, when you look at it, he will say, if you want to really apply this as a method, so first you say the goal of methodology is try to help us to get the world that exists prior to our conceptualizing, means to get to the essence of, let's say, the reality out there. And therefore we need to begin as if we, like our child, we're newborn, we don't know anything. So that's, he thinks, is really necessary. And the basic data here is experiences. That's, we need to really, focus on our experience, how we and how we experience the objects of experience. And he thinks the experiences of another subject can be known as well through intersubjectivity. And in this case, so a phenomenological approach is that we need to continually examine and re-examine our biases and presuppositions to really penetrate into the reality beside what's really presented to us within the culture and within the particular, let's say, ideology. So again, it's the experience of self is basically getting exposed to a certain object of experience, and then methodologically speaking, then now when you experience, you say describe it, you just described your experience, because the self experiencing something and you describe what is really, what does it mean to you, how it's come into your experience. But in that, he's saying that you need bracketing. Bracketing, again, is he got from his background in mathematics, that when you bracket something, when you do certain mathematical work, when you put it in the bracket, that means you ignore everything else outside the bracket. So he thinks that you need to set aside the biases, the theory, the belief, the habitual mode of thought, the judgment, to actually penetrate to the essence. So another word they used to call epoche. Epoche is it's basically say it means that you need to suspend the judgment. And of course, I don't know how much it could be possible when you have, again, worldview. And he says you need to suspend the judgment just to expose yourself directly to the object of experience. That's what he called it, epoche. So in this regard, you need to suspend your natural attitude. And because natural attitude is based on, let's say, the given presupposition, the theory or belief, and then you need to directly, get yourself being exposed to the objects of the experience. So in this case, you need to analyze it, your experience, what you're perceiving, and you need to give the meaning of what you perceive through your transcendental ego, because that's basically that once whatever you experience, that you can live without really see what does it mean, And what does it mean is basically is the meaning given by the transcendental ego. So the ultimate objective is to move from the fact to the essence in terms of giving meaning by transcendental ego, which means that basically what he means, he says, the objective is to really reach the essence. And I'm going to mention this briefly. And he basically thinks that the transcendental ego can penetrate the essence. And then once the essence in this case is not the material ultimate reality, it is the meaning we as a subject assign to what we experience in this regard. So, and therefore he thinks intuition is basically as the way for us to get that. Now, one of the key phrase or way to do that phenomenology thinks that
you have 5 minutes left, Necati.
Okay.
Could you summarize?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I don't have that much. So the key part is to engage in eidetic reduction. So eidetic reductions means that how you can get into the essence of what you experiencing that. So the whole point here is to really get the essence. What is the essence? That's, I think, is very, very important. So what is the essence? He thinks that the essence is, the essence is, let me mention in the outcome, but the essence is going to take you to the meaning and the rigorous science, because he thinks the essence is the invariant part of your experience. So when you look at the tree, and then you can see what can be disregarded, what you cannot disregard, that is, in this case, is the essence. He thinks that the ultimate essence is actually the invariant part of this experience, that is, in this case, that's basically, it is certain structure or certain laws that thinks that basically makes the essence of what you are experiencing. That invariant part of your experience, he thinks, is what you drive from the experience and you give certain meaning to it. And in this case, that you know this, you gain this through yourself, and you can communicate with other. And he thinks that will lead you to go to the rigorous science, because he says that what really you get through we call the rigorous science or natural science is that you get some things and you can, it can be repeatable. And then as a result, you test it and you do the hypothesis, and then you reach something, someone reached the same thing, and now you make the theory, and what you're doing is saying that you are actually discovering certain laws of nature. So in this case, what makes science to be rigorous is the discovering some universal laws of nature through, let's say, empirical observational data. He thinks that phenomenology is more even rigor because science has to rely on factual entity in nature to derive such laws, but phenomenology consists of the fact that its results are not just lawful, but eidetic, means it is true of any subject or consciousness and all times, whether such subject exists or not. So which, in other words, what he's saying is saying that, look, is what you are discovering through your experience is nothing but understanding the meaning, the governing structure, the governing laws of the object of your experience. And he thinks that's the law as well. And those laws are called the universal laws, based on, again, the logic that you have. And in this case, since it's not grounded in the fact, it's grounded in the fundamental evidence based on reflection and the relations of the self to the object of the self. And since anyone with the self can affirm that, he thinks that that's really, that is sufficient, and that is even, so he thinks that the ultimate level of objectivity is rooted in transcendental subjectivity, and which in its turn is grounded in transcendental intersubjectivity, because he thinks there's no objective knowledge without subject. But if you're looking for any objectivity, the objectivity is a universal element in the common experience of the different subjects in terms of their understanding of the structure or the essence of their object of experience. So in this regard, he puts a lot of emphasis on this one, and what does it mean when you experience that, and how you gain objective knowledge through intersubjectivity, and how you can justify this knowledge. And he has discussion on justificatory force. And in this regard, he thinks that is intuition is basically you intuitively know why, because the ego is directly exposed to the very laws that you experience in front of you, and therefore you don't really need to have the secondary evidence. That is the evidence that you have it is in this regard it's sufficient. No, let me finish it with just 2 minutes with what really what I get it from all of those. So essentially, if we look at Nursi, as I argued that in Nursi we see
you have 3 minutes, Necati.
Okay, so if
as I promised you. Okay,
so in Nursi is actually we see that the self is very important as well, and Nursi will put it. We know that Nursi is the key concepts manay, harfi, manay, ismini, and nazar, and you know, and that's really the key concept for him to describe the problem and to also solve, to offer the solution. And in this regard, Nursi thinks that the problem is that when you look at in manay, ismi, nazar, that's in this case that you're making mistakes by reading yourself in wrong way, and then you make mistake to read the universe as well. And therefore, he thinks that we need to really start correction by first understanding the self properly. And Nursi is very clear that the knowledge of the self, ana, is the key only not to basically to understand the universe. He thinks is the key to open the door of the universe, and the key is to understand God as well. So in this regard, that basically you know, he presents it ana as like a ladder of alphabet, that once you master it, that you can use this alphabet and read the meaning in the universe. But the reader here is, in this case, is basically again it is the self that basically reading and making self of it a sense of the experience. So, and the essence, Nursi thinks that beside what we are experiencing is actually the divine names. So in that case, we can, the reality is revealed to us. And when we try to understand it, the ultimate meaning of everything is the divine names. And we can understand the divine names through studying those laws that manifested in our experience. And as we make sense of them, then we can actually make sense of the divine names and the divine power that manifested in everything as well. So again, the difference is obviously that Nursi put a lot of emphasis on reading the self, and Nursi also thinks that once you understand that what is manifested within you is not from you, that's the beginning part, then now you will understand that what is manifested in the universe, that is not from those objects that you experience as well. And therefore he thinks that, you know, again, we can use our true understanding and then reflect on the universe and understand God's in terms of his attributes and his names as well. That's, I think, again, knowing self become the key to know God and to make sense of everything. So I think that is, yeah, there are many examples in Nursi on that one, how he did it. But I think given that your knowledge of the subjects, I assume that even when I was presenting the concept itself, that you had it a lot in your mind, and I think I can stop it here. We can discuss those perhaps within the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Necati. Thank you very much. It was just, you know, you just, although it was, you know, at the hot topic, you entered the topic, but maybe you can give us more information, or, you know, also our friends also can join us with their feedbacks and questions. There are some questions in the chat box. You can check them. And Necati is just, you know, as always, just come us with some fresh, ideas about his readings in phenomenology, and also his background in Risale-i-Nur, in Risale. And I think it deserves to think about that. But let me first ask you, Necati, then maybe we take other questions and comments. You know, you talk about tefekkür and also, reflective mode or reflective thinking in Husserl. And as you know, the tefekkür is also one of the key concepts of Quran, which Quran invites us to make. But it is understood very superficially in the Islamic culture, especially in modern times. When we look at the Ihya of Ghazali, he spares one book to the tafakkur. What would you like to say about tafakkur? Because as you know, Heidegger also says he wrote a book on thinking. What is thinking? And he says we are just beginning to understand what is thinking is. What would you like to say on this?
I think after all this, reading of phenomenology, what I see a reflection. The reflection in this case should be a first person reflection, means that you directly, that's what called enfusi, you directly relate yourself to the, let's say, object of your reflection. Let's say I'm reflecting on now spring is coming, and actually in my yard I have a pigeon that just, lay egg, and then 2 days ago a baby hatched. Okay, now that is basically a subject of reflection for me. It could be, in a sense that if I have a time and look at that, now phenomenology will tell me this, will say, now when you reflect on this new baby, pigeon, that you need to see what is really happening, what is the essence of this experience for you. Try to reflect on try to get the point, the meaning. So the meaning in that case, when I reflected, I say, okay, it's not like, oh, what is the shape, and does it really exist? Does it matter? Or does what he says, no, this is not the point. The point is not what is the chemistry, what is the atoms, that's not the point. The point is, what does it mean that when you observe this baby, new baby bird hatch from the egg, and you're watching the mom and dad together going and actually, and taking turn and feeding them. And in that case, basically phenomenology will say you will discover some laws, some rules that governing that. Like the laws is that there is a care, obviously, and that care is necessary for the baby to survive. Now, can the mom have the consciousness to really think and have such care? Obviously not. There is a knowledge. There is a knowledge in terms of building the nest. There is a knowledge in terms of to know what kind of food that the baby needs. So in this case, basically, reflection will say that you need to reflect on that to see what is the message and the meaning is communicated to you through this observational acts, which basically means that now what you're seeing in front of your eyes, you're seeing that there is a revelation, there is a power, there is a mercy, there is a knowledge, there is a wisdom that revealing himself through this a new hatched baby and communicating to me, directly speaking to me and telling me that, look, I am all knowing and I'm all powerful, I am most merciful, I am all wise. So in this case, that baby bird and that eggs, and the more, of course, knowledge I gain, the more I becomes basically, the more I, get the essence, and that's in this case the manifested divine names in that, and the more I feel that I get connected to God directly. So that's what I feel that the reflection has to be enfusi and has to be in terms of reflecting directly, having the ego, ana, relating itself to the object of reflection in a form of deriving the meaning, reading as an ayah and seeing as a communication. What does it mean to me? What does it tell to me? That's what's really I see. And I see this type of reflection almost everywhere of Nursi's writing and Nursi's life. And I can talk for hours on this one alone.
Okay, no problem. There are some tough questions on the chat box.
Yeah, so I think, I didn't look at it because I'm answering. I cannot do two things at the same time, but if you wouldn't mind, maybe we can have someone ask the question. Meanwhile, you can look at them and tell me what it is, because otherwise.
Yes, Colin, can you ask your questions?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Necati Bey. It was very interesting. Unfortunately, you didn't have the time required, necessary for looking at the comparator that you used to recite Nursi, but in your eloquent exposition of tafakkur that you've just given us, you have actually told us how Nursi looks at the creation. He looks at the creation and he looks for meaning. And because he has both his ana and he also has revelation as a guide, he comes to those wonderful conclusions that you came to. But that isn't really what phenomenology does. Because I can look for the meaning of something. And as I did a few nights ago, I watched a video of an alligator attacking I think it was a cheetah or a tiger. The tiger wanders near to the river, and the alligator comes out and grabs him. And if I'm looking for meaning, what that tells me, my ana, tells me that nature is cruel and it is red in tooth and claw, and that it's about violence, it's about hostility, it's about might is right. Now, I've done that, I've come to that conclusion through looking for meaning. I'm not interested in what a tiger does or what an alligator does, but what I've seen happen there, for me, is an instance of violence. Now, that is the meaning that I have derived by making tafakkur on that particular incident. What you've described is something completely different. You talk there as a believer, not as a phenomenologist.
Okay. Okay. So can I comment?
Yeah, I finished. Yeah, and I've said a lot in the chat anyway, so ignore me
Maybe,
for now
maybe,
and listen to others.
maybe Necati, may I suggest we have other questions because Mashit also has a question. Then also Nasreen, and you can maybe summarize all of them. Maybe some of them they are relevant to each other.
Yeah, I think mine. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Alaikum
Thank you
salam.
so
Please
much,
go
Brother
ahead.
Necati.
Go ahead.
Very, very interesting question. Very interesting talk. Sorry. Yeah, mine was very similar to Colin's. It was really, I understood that Nursi looks at phenomena. And then he initially sees things as they are. A flower is just a flower, but then when he interprets the meaning, examines in accordance to the criteria of revelation, then he sees beyond the form. So I'm just wondering if this is the way Husserl does it as well, or is it different?
Yeah. Should I answer?
Okay. If Nasreen also she has a question, maybe she.
Yes. Yes, good morning from New York. Thank you so much, Necati, for this wonderful presentation. Lots to think about. I'm actually very much interested in phenomenology, and this is a good start for me to start thinking and compare to Nursi. My question was mostly about when he talks about forgetting or not looking into the presuppositions that we all have as human beings when we look at an object. Is that logically even possible? I mean, human intellect is very active, as you know, in every aspect of our lives. So while I do understand going above and beyond the surface, like, you know, moving away from the surface and getting to the deeper essence of what we look at, I do understand that, but I'm not sure if I understand 100% his point about totally putting aside all of the presuppositions that we all have as human beings, but definitely moving away from the surface to the meaning, that's really doable. So I don't know if I misunderstood Necati when you talked about Husserl's saying that we should totally forget about all of these presuppositions, or is he saying that for a moment, look deeper? So maybe that's a distinction. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Necati.
Okay, yeah, I think Colin Hocam and Dr. Mashit's questions are quite close to each other. So yeah, I think that is true. I agree. I'm not saying that Husserlian pure phenomenology or transcendental phenomenology or Heideggerian, let's say, existential phenomenology is the way to go. And actually, to my surprise, that though this is a kind of means and a vehicle can really take you to metaphysical reality, but I didn't really see those guys as entertaining some things and have such question at all, okay? And again, I don't know why they didn't really go that much, but I agree that you can't really, when you look at it, the experience, Husserl used a concept of life worlds. So life world means that he's saying that I actually consider life worlds like a worldview. So in a sense that, let's say, as a believer, I have a Tawhidi worldview that now I can look at my experience within Tawhidi worldview. And Husserl will say that you can't really have an experience without any background that is giving meaning to your experience, that he call a life world. That the life world is the totality of your whole experience. And again, Heidegger will put it history inside this as well. So in this regard, that's, yes, I agree. And therefore, I think that the reason that the Husserlian phenomenology cannot get us to God because it has different worldview, because it doesn't have tawhid. So, and therefore I'm not suggesting that phenomenology as a sufficient way, but I actually, what I'm seeing phenomenology as a means can be useful, very useful. And I somehow, I somehow see that Nursi use it a lot as a method in terms of, again, in terms of reading the divine names manifested in the objects and the events. But I agree, this has to be, we have to have a worldview and we have to have a tawhid, we have to have revelation, and that give us the right, again, right backgrounds within which that we can make the meaning of this experience. And that's what I will say. Now, in terms of Dr. Nasreen's questions, yeah, I think that's one key question that Heidegger raised the same objection to Husserl somehow when you look at it. Heidegger says that, look, you can never just take yourself out of the experience and just, sit out of your experience and observe and make sense of what's happening. He says you have to get involved, and you're involved in the world. But in Husserl, he thinks that it's really necessary, at least to be aware that you need to put your judgment aside. So it's like he called it the temporary suspension of judgment, which means that, the way I look at it this way, I say it's basically meaning, think as if that you just come to this planet for first time, you've never been here. When you go out, when you experience the spring, if you really want to experience the spring, think as if this is your first time that you just, find yourself in this amazing, let's say, places. Then he say that now you can fully be aware of the object of your experience, and then you can start to give the meaning to that. That's what I think he will say. It's necessary that, because his argument is that if you start with the presupposition, if you say I already know, then you're just going to reflect what you have in your mind on what you try to know. So therefore, you're not going to gain anything from that. So is it possible? Again, I think it is difficult, but I think it is helpful to know that you need to somehow have such novice perspective to really penetrate into the essence of your experience. That's what I think it means, but I agree that is very, very challenging, if not impossible.
Okay, Mustafa Tuna has a question. Please go ahead, Mustafa.
Yes, assalamu alaikum. Sorry, but I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. The buttons that are always there are not there. Anyway, yeah, thank you for the presentation, Necati. As usual, it's like very interesting, thought-provoking. So this is what I'm getting with the little that I was able to catch. I understand this is a very complicated and complex thought stream that needs more attention. So traditionally, we think of three main sources of knowledge: as the intellect, the senses, and veracious reports. Now, philosophy takes one of these out. It says like veracious reports is not something that we are going to look at, and we are going to deal with intellect and the senses. And although this has a longer history, European philosophy seems to have run into the ground with Descartes saying, okay, I'm going to doubt everything. I'm not going to rely on the senses. And then I need to build from there on. And he thinks that he comes out of this by attributing everything to a God who will not deceive. But then, move on a couple of centuries, and philosophers say, okay, that was a choice. He chose to believe in God, and that, God does this. We don't think that there is God. So how do we establish certainty about the existence, meaningfulness, implications of things without reference to God? And Kant says, okay, I got it. I'm doing it, but that doesn't satisfy us or the philosophers. Some say, okay, this is a useless discussion. We will just assume that things exist. And Comte says that there is, actually, I can even read from that quote. The true positive spirit consists above all in studying what is in order to infer what will be in accordance with the general dogma that natural laws are invariable. So even positivists say that in order to be able to talk about things, think about things, exist as a philosopher, we have to accept a dogma. So what I see here seems to be another attempt to establish, not affirm or confirm, but establish the existence of things that can be experienced through the senses and can confer meaning. My question then is, do you think that Nursi needs Manay Harfi to establish the existence of things, to have certainty about the existence of things? Or is that a stage that comes after that certainty is already attained in dealing with what to do with the certainty that we have things exist and they have meaning? Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah. It's an interesting question, but I think in terms of, let's briefly mention in terms of your comment side, what I see in Husserl that he thinks that in Greek there was a telos, and teleology was the essential part with modern science that will leave this out completely. And one way that it seems like that Husserl is trying to see how he can bring telos again into our scientific, endeavor. That's, I think, is one thing I understand it. Now, what he does in this case, the meaning that he tries to have it is that he thinks that the ego is purpose driven, and the ego is the source of making the meaning or giving the meaning of whatever is experienced. That's what he thinks. Now, again, the question is, as I mentioned, that's really whether he can really get the meanings without God is. So he tried to really see what does it mean to you, and in terms of really that there is meaning beside. His objection is that we think that something's meaningful based on observational, experimental data, and beside that, nothing's meaningful. He says, look, what the self is experiencing as communicating with each other as well, it's meaningful, and so we can find the commonality, and this is also there is invariant part of this experience can be communicated that called intersubjectivity, and that is, he argues, that is even more rigorous than the rigorous physical scientific knowledge. That's his argument. Now, but again, does he go and try to really look at what is the ultimate reality, what's metaphysical, things behind the physical? No, he doesn't go there. Now, for Nursi, where I see, Nursi's question is this: do we really need body? And when Nursi even answered the question of whether do we need the body in Jannah, you see that Nursi put a lot of emphasis on embodied self that somehow is needed to get certain data that through which that you gain certain level that even angels cannot get. That is basically when you look at its Lucid interpretation of why Adam, peace be upon him, that is superior to angels. So he thinks that is all because you have a body and an ego, and as an embodied self, that what you experience that angels cannot do that. So though they can observe it all the time, but they can't really get to the level of the understanding of God as you can. So for that reason, in my understanding, Nursi think is necessary that you use the embodied self to make the sense of the divine manifestations in the event, in the object, and in your life. And that's how I see the Manai Harfi is. So for that reason, I feel that Nursi thinks that when you use self as wahidi qiyasi, and then when you relate to, basically you truly understand that ajz mutlaq and faqr mutlaq, that what is working within you is the divine power, and then you use wahidi qiyasi means you just analogically think, okay, that's what works in the birth that I mentioned is also divine power. Then now he says you will reach and realize that God is working in everything, and God is communicating to you within everything. And that's, I think, now, is this his way of to reach the certainty, or is this, I think in a sense that, yes, you have to have an iman and you have to start with something, but I certainly think that the reflection through Manai Harfi does help you to increase your level of certainty, that what Nursi will call it, it's ilm al-yaqeen, but at the degree of haqq al-yaqeen. That means that you really, you just, in a sense that, because if you remember Nursi mentioned he finds something through ilm, through knowledge, that give you such certainty rather than just, subjective through, let's say, personal karama. So I think that's what he says that he found. I believe that's Manai Harfi, and that's the use of ana as a wahidi qiyasi through the Manai Harfi that really make you to feel and to hear God through everything. And that's for sure give you the state of khushu and the state of the feeling the divine presence, and then feeling that you're in direct communication with him. Then I think that's what you see when Nursi, how you in a barla, he will again look at the tree and look at the flowers and reflect on them and have such have such experience and share with us. So therefore again, that's for I think that is somehow even if not necessary, it's very useful to gain uncertainty.
Okay, thank you. Professor Ferit El-Attas is with us from Singapore. He has a question. Please, Professor Ferit, go ahead.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Alaikum salam. It is good to see you.
You too. Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, Necati, thank you. It was so interesting, but also very, very complex, So I have a couple of questions. One of them is maybe a bit naive, so please, tolerate it. Trying to understand Nursi, in trying to understand Husserl's phenomenological method, you gave the example of the hatching of the baby pigeon, right? And then you talked about understanding something essential about the baby pigeon, that it needs care and nurturing and so on and so forth. But my question is this: why would we need phenomenology to answer that? I think through experience, through observation, through trial and error, as it were, by repeated observation, we also learn about these attributes or traits or characteristics of the baby pigeon. So why I'm not able to understand why phenomenology is necessary or important, in our understanding. Sort of related to this, when Husserl talks about, or when phenomenologists talk about peeling away the symbolic meanings of things, and I was thinking of the example that Colin was giving about the alligator. It seems to me that when we talk about the cruelty of nature, we often say nature is cruel. But when we say nature is cruel, we're using cruelty in a metaphorical sense, because we can't really say nature is really cruel, because we're attributing human characteristics to, human attributes to nature. So we're using it metaphorically. When we say humans are cruel, we may use it metaphorically sometimes, or we may use it literally, because there is a concept of cruelty among humans. And theologically, that's also a concept of cruelty. But applied to nature, it's a different matter. There I can see suspending our judgment about a phenomenon, about bracketing, to understand essentially what nature is. Is it cruel? Is it something else? And how can we understand what we see in terms of cruelty? How do we actually understand, the behavior of was it a crocodile or an alligator? I don't remember. Yeah, so I'd like your comment on that. And my second question is this: what you said about this relates to Nursi. What you said about Nursi about the self, the understanding of the phenomenon of the world in terms of divine names and so on and so forth. Okay, this of course is clear. It's part of our tradition. It's a very long tradition of understanding. But my question is this: why is it necessary to bring, or what is the benefit of bringing phenomenology in? In other words, how does phenomenology, does it in any way enhance our understanding of Nursi, or is it the other way around? Does Nursi enhance our understanding of phenomenology? What is the purpose of of bringing them together? Thank you.
Yes, Necati, please go ahead.
Okay, it's very difficult question. So I think on the first part, the first question is like when we watch this pigeon, that can we get the same thing through observation and let's say experimental data? But Husserl will say that what you get it through observation and experimental eventually has to be the knowledge of the self, which means that still the self has to relate, because the knowledge here is that the phenomenology defined not as the knowledge that's basically representational, that you get something as a data to mind, is that you relate directly to yourself, to what you're experiencing. And in this case that, again, that relational, and in a sense that what does it mean really, and what is really happening there, that part is really, you can get through phenomenology. Now, the reason I think that phenomenology can help, because in this observation, let's say, Nursi is in 32nd word, I think, when he did a reflection that we see, he will talks about certain laws. He says Kanun Karam and Kanun Rahmat. So he's talk about the laws of, let's say, a certain laws that manifested in a certain event. Then he tried to observe and drive the law as like the law of gravity. So in that case, the essential part here is like it's when you really try to understand the essence, that you will somehow understand there are some governing laws behind this one. And to me, that governing laws, that when you understand yourself truly, can get you to God. Therefore, I think that again, phenomenology can be helpful. So again, and I think I can relate this one to the third question, how this can be helpful. So do we really need phenomenology to understand, Nursi and Islamic tradition of, let's say, reflecting on the things and try to, get connected to the divine names? I think phenomenology can help us, and we can help phenomenology as well, and in two ways, in both ways. So phenomenology can help us because that through phenomenology, perhaps we can, better engage in reflection and look at the nature of our experience and try to see and understand the ego. Because, and I even when I ask many people that, let's say, Nursi readers, and ask them what does self mean, and I see that's really, we're not clear what does self mean. And those are guys spends their whole life studying the self. And, we read Nursi, and Nursi says the self is the key to understand the universe. I think that we can learn something from their study of the self, of the consciousness, of the experience. And I learn a lot personally because, but again, I think Nursi will help you to more than the phenomenology can help you, in the sense that because you need to first, when you read Nursi, you understand the self properly, this understanding of the self is the key. If you don't get that one, as Husserl and Heidegger and other, they did not have it, and you see that it didn't go anywhere for them. So ultimately, it become, yeah, it's just philosophical, let's say, works with no real ultimate, let's say, way of reaching the truth. So in this regard, yes, we obviously, I'm not saying like we go to phenomenology. I'm saying that phenomenology is a methodology, has been out there for almost 100 years. There has been a lot of works, conceptualizations, and understanding that I think, particularly if we are going to communicate such an idea to the scientific community, I feel phenomenology can be very helpful to say, you know what, I can speak from the first person experience, and that's also has a valid position as much as, even if not more than, what you're talking based on observation, experimental data.
Okay, Necati, but here's another opposite comments by our dear friend colleague Colin, and he says phenomenology clearly didn't help Husserl to reach God. That's the problem, he says. And at the end of his life, he said the dream is over, indicating that phenomenology had failed its founder. What would you like to say?
I 100% agree with him. That's why I think, that's why we're not saying that, go to phenomenology. We're saying that phenomenology is a means that once we have the worldview, we have the tawhid, we have the divine revelation, and that we can use this means particularly. The reason I'm excited about, I think phenomenology for the first time is going to allow us to go and to directly communicate the first person experience with the scientific world, and saying, look, the evidence is not limited to the observation experimental data. And what I have, it is not subjective, it's intersubjectively verifiable objective knowledge. And therefore, that's as valid as the one that you presented from, the third person perspective. Now, remember, now you cannot even write an article from first person perspective in any scientific journal, as you have to write it in a third person perspective. And phenomenology will say, no, this is nonsense. You can't do that, because there is no third person without first person. So, and that's itself, I think, is a great contribution. That's why I think it can help. Beside that, as I mentioned, is really to understand the true nature of experience and the self and consciousness, and see how it is directed towards the object of experience. I learn a lot. It helped me a lot that when I reflect on the world through the lens of phenomenology, I think I got it more.
Okay, Professor Alparslan Hocam wants to make a comment about that. Yes, Hocam, please go ahead.
Well, actually, my comment will be a repetition of already what my colleagues already said, and probably it's more on the way of a critique. It's just, I wanted to say that, this phenomenology is actually a barren theory. It will not lead us to anywhere. It doesn't mean that there is no truth in it. Of course there is. There are very good ideas, bits of statements that we can find, that we can use, utilize, and so on. The impression is, I have not studied Husserlian phenomenology so much. My expertise is more on the Heideggerian side, as he expresses, just with one motto type of a sentence, the main, theory or approach or method of phenomenology, with one sentence, to the things themselves. Just very simple. But you see, this brings to my mind again, the method that is really developed in our tradition, in the Tasawwuf tradition. But as Colin very good, he expressed that, phenomenology is not using any faith criterion. This is the basic issue. And I think Necati is trying to unite this with Ustaz's Nursi's background, so that to attach this faith criterion, whether this is possible or not, maybe he can comment on that. Another thing is that I don't see any relation with Nursi's the I, ana, and the self as it is explained in a phenomenological approach. There are certain other things that can also be criticized. Their, theory of perception, for instance. Actually, the critique is more their critique of the representational theory, but I think that is not really so much relevant for us. The thing, again, the emphasis is that it's a barren theory, because they constantly, it's like in a circle, you are turning constantly. Remember the statements that already made, describe, and then, continuously try to, turn to examine your own, preconceptions and so on and so forth. But all these things are already found in many of our tradition at the same time. So that was what I wanted to say.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Necati, Mustafa also wants to add something. Maybe you can, then you can give your answer to both of them.
Okay.
Yes, Mustafa, could you just, summarize for us? You wrote,
yeah, sure. I already wrote that.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand the project that we are trying to get to here. Phenomenology, it seems we are assuming is something that is going to help us to convey Nursi's message in a better packaged way or something like it. This is a crude description of it, caricaturizing the situation. But to do that, if you are going to use Husserl or Heidegger or whatever as a means to convey a message, that package needs to be more accessible than the message that we are trying to convey. And when I look around, I've been in the academia for such a long time. I have not heard anybody in the history department, in the anthropology department, etc., who is really interested in Husserl, and let alone outside the academia. And thinks of Husserl as their means to access the world. So if Husserl is not taken for granted, is not something that is accessible to people, how and why should we, or how can we and why should we try to use this really complex and complicated philosophy to convey something that I personally find is more accessible, partly because of his use of qiyas, temthili, etc. So I was thinking about this as a project, and the value of that project, and the feasibility of that project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Necati, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So Al-Hasan Hocam, I know that, of course, he is an expert of Heidegger, though we haven't heard any presentation from Al-Hasan Hocam in Heidegger. He did his PhD on that one. I'm still looking to have one. But perhaps that he thinks that there's really nothing from Heidegger to do. But Heidegger is another guy that really, I think that it's worth to discuss. I'm not saying that he's really, he's the truth carrier. But I think my reading of Husserl and Heidegger, obviously, Al-Hasan know very well, is the story, personal story itself is very, very sad. That when Heidegger gained in the position and become, and during the Nazi times and had the power, and have the Husserls to be banned from the university to even teach that he was his assistant, that is, I think, is really, really, it's hurting stories. But beside that, I found that there are some substantial differences between Heideggerian phenomenology and Husserlian pure phenomenology. And actually, I feel Husserl somehow felt to be betrayed by his best students, and his attempt in terms of the crisis of European sciences that somehow to really give the message to say that what Heidegger is telling you is not everything about phenomenology and is not for sure is my core messages. Now, so for that matter, I think pure phenomenology is when I read Heidegger, I say Heidegger really got his concept that he mainly focused on the beings and the Dasein, that becomes the essence for his understanding. But Husserl's, I think he is more terminology in which that he tries to really help us to understand the nature of experience and the nature of the self itself. That's and along with intentionality. I think if Alparslan Hocam, you read Husserl's, for sure you will have way better understanding, and you can perhaps help us to enlighten some of those confusion points that I couldn't explain it well. But again, this is really the question for us is like, well, you spent all of your PhD on Heidegger. Now, can we say Heidegger is really, is it worthless? No, I'm sure that you saw that it's worth to study, because though you never present Heidegger like a Nursi to others as the basically the guidance to the truth, but I think you saw it's worth to study. But I think Husserl's deserves some attention. I believe it deserves attention. And obviously we don't have to agree everything with Husserl's, that we were saying that, what can we learn from that? And your concept of, like, let's say a question of Nursi's human self, I, Anna, and Husserl's self, I really think that is we find a lot in common in this regard. And I actually believe me reading Phenomenology and Husserl's and a better in this regard. And I think we need more time to really reflect on that one. Now, I agree that what I am doing actually, I am actually distorting Husserlian phenomenology to a certain extent, because Husserl nor Heidegger, none of them has actually any interest in the metaphysical dimension of reality. So therefore, it wasn't their intention. It wasn't. But I believe that their method can help us in this regard to really go to the essence of the existence in terms of the manifested divine names and discover those universal laws through our personal experiencing self, and communicate with other, through this language. That's again, but again, what we're going to call it? Are we going to call metaphysical phenomenology, or I don't know what? But I agree. I think if you think that what I'm talking is actually pure phenomenology, Husserlian phenomenology, I think it will be wrong, and therefore I really understand.
Necati, I think we have a good news. Alparslan Hocam says he will be next presenter to talk about Heidegger, as you suggested. I think we can continue our dialogue then, and I think today we are just out of time, and time is just finished.
Not next.
Huh?
It is already, because for the rest 3 or 4 speakers already determined.
No. You are in the queue. Yes, I know. Yes, you are you are on the list now. Okay.
Well, that's excellent news, really. I tried to tease Alparslan Hocam many times, but it seems like it took a full presentation to really get him to accept such things. It's really great news. I think it's worth to have such discussion. I
think it was a great talk. It was, a good talk. It just brings, pop up new questions and new thoughts in our mind. I think there's a lot of things, and we have to talk. We think reading about them, and also it's a good opportunity how we can, to see the relevance of Nursi's philosophy or his teaching with the modern philosophy, and also it was a good comparison, although there was some problems. It is, I think, normal. And once more I want to thank Necati and all of you to joining us on this beautiful Sunday. We have in Istanbul a beautiful Sunday, but although unfortunately we are under lock, we couldn't go outside. And I wish, inshallah, it will be sooner we will get out of this lockdown. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for such great opportunity.
Thank you,
I really
Necati.
appreciate
Yes, okay.
for the inputs and question as well. Mustafa Hocam,
Yes.
inshallah, I will personally try
Okay.
to communicate my answer to your question. Sorry, we didn't have time to address your
Yes.
question.
Yes. Thank you.